And so we are made of light. We are shining, radiant light as the wide open heart. It's already in place. The reason that we tend not to see this is because we are carrying around all kind of content, like rocks. We're carrying rocks around. We filled the space with rocks, with stuff. We filled up the space. And so this radiant, shining light that we are feels like it doesn't always have the space to shine, and yet it is shining, shining nevertheless. This light that we are is an eternal flame, an eternal light that never ever stops shining in the knowing of itself. It is ever radiant, ever luminous. And yet our lived experience can be of carrying around this heavy burden of rocks, of stuff, of ideas and concepts and beliefs. It is just to empty it all out. Empty it all out so that the shining light of the radiant heart can shine its full beam once again, can shine in the fullness of what it is, naturally, always, never, ever changing. It is to stop telling the story. It is to favor the silence, favor the deep, silent peace of natural being, and stop telling the story of my life. To favor the essence, nature, and the truth of who you are is to nourish this truth and allow this radiant light to shine. To keep telling the story is to favor the illusion of separation and to continue to be burdened, weighed down with ideas and concepts, to continue carrying around these rocks, right, that stop the ability of that light to fully shine, to fully beam its natural radiance. In truth, you are the radiant light, but the misunderstanding is an identification with the story, identification with the ideas and beliefs and concepts, and to keep repeating them, to keep telling that story to yourself and apparent others, to keep telling the story and perpetuating the cycling idea that there is separation when there is no separation. So it is to favor what is true, to favor the light, to favor the great peace, the silence, the stillness, the simple joy of being yourself, to favor the knowing of the natural being. It supports a deeper and deeper restoring of divine remembering. We are restoring the natural connection to being. We are coming back to a naturalness. We are coming into remembering who we are and who we have always been. That we have never ever been away from this natural being. We have never not been the shining light that just is. It is to favor the light and stop telling the story of darkness, right? To favor the light and then to let the light shine. As the light shines, the light the warmth, the brilliance, the brightness. It illuminates all of the areas that are holding ideas and concepts, all that is suppressed, the conditioning, all that is unconscious. When we are favoring and resting in what is true, we are illuminating everything. We are the principle of light, right? The light principle. We are the illumination. And being the illumination allows everything to get illuminated, to shine. The true radiant nature of absolutely everything, every fiber of our being is this radiant light. So it is to favor the light and to stop telling the story, right? To empty out all the rocks, empty out all of the beliefs and ideas. And of course, that is not a doing, and it is not a process in time. It is about just simply being here in this moment and recognizing in the felt sense of being that you already are. You already are radiant, shining light. You are already love, divine. You are consciousness in the process of opening to remember the divine wholeness and light that you are. You are not a human looking for the divine. You are not someone searching for something. You are consciousness in the process, the flowing process of remembering its fullness, its illuminated divine nature. This is the truth of who you are, and this is what is in process. The intelligence of consciousness is in the process of waking up and remembering the fullness of its true divine nature. It's one consciousness, and you are a point of that consciousness. Deeper than that, you are the full, pure consciousness, but the felt sense of the lived experience is of the unique laws of nature that are a point, but the point absolutely contains the totality, right? The point is the totality. And the totality, in truth, is the point. So we are the consciousness that is evolving within the naturalness of being to open to finer and finer frequencies of divine remembering, of divine wholeness. Everything is unfolding naturally. There is no one doing anything, and there is nothing that can be done. And so as these words come, they are not instruction. It is just about attuning, aligning, and remembering where you feel the resonance of truth. Where you feel the resonance is the attunement with your own divine nature. It is to come into the remembering of being the light. Feel your own shining, radiant heart. Feel your heart shining right now. Feel the love that you are right now. The beauty, the openness, and the blissful emptiness of who you are in truth is right here now. It is to empty in this moment of all of the concepts and ideas and beliefs. You see, these concepts and ideas and beliefs, they do not exist in the way that we imagine. They only exist when attention is given to them. When attention is not given to them, they are not here. Test it for yourself. Right now, in this moment, the felt sense of being being the being, just being here, to feel your own simple presence, to feel that you are here now, the timeless being, and to notice that the timeless being that you are has no concepts and ideas, is completely empty and open. And in direct experience right now, you can feel the truth of this. You can confirm this truth right here now in direct experience, that the felt sense of being has no beliefs, has no agenda, no ideas, no conditioning, no story. That the felt sense of being is completely empty of content and is utterly free, infinite openness, emptiness, blissful, simple being. This is the essence nature of all beings. It is already in place. We are not in the process of becoming something that we are not. We are in the process of remembering what we have always been. We are in the process of opening like a flower so that the fullness of the light of the divine heart can shine its truth, shine its wholeness, and shine its love. This shining light, this shining openness is love. Love is what is here when there is no separation and no content and ideas that are creating beliefs, fragmentation, and division. When we recognize the openness, we recognize love, and that love is the nature of every being. Love is the nature of everything. Love is the openness, the simplicity, the purity. When we recognize the love that we are, we stop looking for love in all the wrong places. We stop looking for love in the external. We stop imagining and fantasizing that there is something outside of us that can bring us a sense of wholeness, connection, and love. We stop fantasizing and we stop valuing and favoring what is illusory and born of belief. We stop nourishing the misunderstanding. We stop favoring that which is not real and true. We start favoring and resting in the great divine nourishment of the being, because we recognize without question that what we are truly longing for, what we desire, is to know the great truth and to really be in the refinement process, which is the great work of refining all of the discordant patterns of consciousness, refining everything that is unconscious into the light of being, transmuting everything into divine love, bringing everything that feels to be separate and divided and divisive to love, to wholeness, to the remembering of the oneness of being that is the fullness of heart and the light that is ever present and shining and radiant. There is such a simplicity to what this truth is. And when we hear these words, we can attune to and align with the remembering of the simplicity. We can rest in the being, in the wide open heart of being, and simply remember what is true and real. We can allow the sense of heart to open and open and open to more of its luminous nature, for the heart to get wider and wider and wider, to remember its infinite, unbounded nature as the self of all. That the heart is not something that is personal, and it is not something that closes and opens and closes and opens and closes. The true heart is ever, ever open, wide open, so wide open that it is infinite and boundless. It has no edges or boundaries. And so it is to recognize that your true heart is infinite and boundless and radiant and shining in its own brilliance. The shining is a shining of the knowing of yourself. So as these words come, it is just to feel the resonance and the natural alignment, the natural attunement, that there is no effort needed, there is no instructions to follow. It is just to fall back, fall open, fall into freedom, as if by accident, as if by magic, to just fall open, fall into the wide open heart that is your true essence nature. Just fall into yourself, zoom out, fall in to the shining light of your own heart. And so you start to recognize that there is no journey to come to yourself. It is not a journey that you can make with your mind, and it is not a journey you can make with any sense of doership. It is a natural attunement, and in the natural attunement, it's a spontaneous alignment, a spontaneous remembering of the being that you are. It is in hearing the words, recognizing the resonance, and coming to the felt sense of being. When you feel the felt sense of being, you align with the naturalness of your essence nature. You align with the naturalness of the wide open, infinite heart that you have always been. And there is joy here. The joy is divine, it is luminous, and it is bubbling like a wellspring. It is always here, always bubbling, and always joyful. Nothing can take away this joy. Nothing can disturb it. It is always bubbling and luminous, sparkling and glimmering in its naturalness. And this is your essence nature. This same divine joy that we speak of is who you are in truth. So we come right now to the remembering of being. We come right now to the felt sense of simply being here now, effortless openness, that you can feel the felt sense of being. And nothing else is needed. Just to be here, just as you are, and to consciously recognize the being that you are, to consciously be aware of yourself being here, being conscious of your own presence, being conscious of the being that you are, consciously aware of yourself being here, consciously awake to yourself, consciously alert in the recognition of your true essence nature. We could say this is where the heart confirms that it is not a confirmation in the mind that recognizes the being. It is the heart that confirms the being. It is the being itself that recognizes its own nature and that it has always been this way. The innermost being recognizes its own innate silence and just falls deeper into itself, naturally, simply, spontaneously, falls into itself, resting in the oneness, in the vast open spaciousness. Right now, this moment, just as it is, shining, radiant, luminous, brilliance. This is the light that you are. And so we start to recognize the light, the lightness. The light and the lightness is felt in the felt sense of being. There is an openness and an emptiness. And in the openness and the emptiness, the light is shining. It's a shining light of pure knowing. It is where the being knows itself through being itself. And here the light is shining. And here there is a lightness. And the lightness is here because the burden is laid down. The rocks are laid down. No need to carry the rocks of concept and belief. No need to carry your story around. No need to wear it like a badge, as if you have been to war and you're returning somehow victorious. It is not a story of victory. It is a story of misery, and it perpetuates its story of misery the more that we tell it. We have to be so aware not to identify with the story, so as not to become what we are thinking about, so as not to create what we are feeding, so as not to create more misery. So we want to stop telling the story, and value the silence, favor the silence, live as the emptiness, live as the empty space, live as the formless being, and do not identify and coagulate. There is a certain amount of that happens naturally so that the life can be lived. But we can be so aware not to keep telling the story, not to be wanting validation in the story. One of the great traps is that we are so desperate in our personhood to be validated, seen and loved in the external. And so we keep telling our story in the hope that we will be seen. But the truth is that we will never ever be seen by the ones that we want to see us. And the sooner that we realize that it is a fruitless journey to keep on telling the story, keep playing out the cycle of victimization, hoping that we will eventually be seen and loved and feel connection with either our partners or friends or families. Never will that happen. Never will that bring fulfillment. Never can it bring us to wholeness. And the sooner that we recognize that we will never ever get that validation in the world that will bring a sense of true fulfillment and wholeness, that the sense of wholeness and fulfillment that we are looking for is the knowing of the self. It is only when we face ourselves so fully, when we have the true, deep, profound courage to face all of ourselves, to really see ourselves. We could say to see our own purity, to see our own God nature, to see our own light shining, to see the incredible, miraculous truth of what we are. But first, we have to be willing to see all of the obscurations, right? We can have flashes of seeing this truth, but we will never surrender fully into our own purity and our own beauty while there are beliefs that we are unworthy of that, or that we want somehow to keep separate. We want to believe that we are separate from God separate from the divine, because there is a deeply held, conditioned idea that we are not worthy or lovable or enough. So when we keep telling our story, we keep perpetuating that belief, and we keep telling our story and identifying with the misery so that we can hopefully find someone that will listen and validate us. It will never happen. And the more that we can really hear this as a resonance that can bring a recognition, the more we lay down the burden and we empty out the rocks of our story, and we stop carrying around our beliefs and our hopes, right? What is hope? Hope is just another distortion. It's another distortion, another fear, really, that we hope that things will be different or better. Again, it's completely misguided, and it will never, ever be fulfilled. We are so much better to just be utterly hopeless. When we are utterly hopeless, we are empty of all of the fears and distortions that keep us telling our story. This is who I am. This is what I've lived through. This is what is important to me, right? Hear me, see me, know me, love me. Let it go and know yourself. Let it go and know yourself. Hear yourself. Hear the deep longing to be seen and heard and loved, and give that nourishment to yourself. Meet yourself so fully. Feel the pain of separation that is trying to be healed through being seen in the external, and hear yourself, see yourself, meet all of these threads of your own separation, your own cycle of victimization. Be willing to see and meet, receive, love, and really hold in this enlightened, illuminated presence of true divine love, your own nature, all of the parts of yourself that are still trying to get fulfillment and nourishment in the external. Be willing to meet all of yourself. Be willing to love all of yourself, to hold a presence of true light and being for all of yourself, to give up the external search and to truly meet yourself, to truly hold this light as the me empties out the rocks and burdensome story, all of the ways and the conditioning, the ways that we identify with all of these ideas of who we are, and we create a narrative, we create a story, and we perpetuate that story in every moment, because consciousness is an intelligence, and what we think about and nourish, we recreate it in this moment. And we think about it and we nourish it and we recreate it in this moment. So we want to have such an illumined awareness and presence of what are we thinking about? What are we telling? What story are we telling ourselves? What story are we trying to have heard? Are we shouting from the rooftops and the treetops, right? What have we got on repeat? What story are we repeating and repeating? What is the story of misery and victimization that we are addicted to? We're addicted to it because it's familiar, and at the same time we are longing for freedom, and we are working, we could say, to rest in the being and to sit and to be, and all of this that is nourishing the being. But with one hand we are giving everything to God and grace, and with the other hand we are constantly taking it all back and then telling our story, right? Collaborating with separation. So we want to come to such an acute depth of illumined awareness And this illumined awareness is our very own nature. It is here now, and it is here in every moment. Where are we projecting? Where are we laying blame outside of ourselves? Where are we wallowing in guilt or shame, right? All of these things can feel a little hard to hear, but they can also feel like a breath of fresh air, because as we name these things, these habits, as we name them, as we name the story of victimization and all of the ways it plays out, it can turn a light on, and we can see ourselves in the reflection and say, oh, wow, that's what is happening here. I'm completely identified with the story of misery. I'm completely identified in subtle ways, even with being one who is suffering, being one who's having a hard time, right? Looking for this validation in the external, looking for love, looking for connection, right? All of the ways. If we can illuminate where we are denying ourselves, this is not an unfolding that has anything to do with anyone else. There is no one else. There is only this one self. And it is all about you and you in your inner world and where you are resting the attention. The human condition is a story of victimization, and it will do anything to keep telling its story and to keep bringing forward its ideas. Every thought is not true. There is not a single thought that is true. Truth is here now, the presence of being in the absence of thought, in the absence of me, and in the absence of a story of victimization. The story that anything has ever happened to me and poor me, right? It's not to be without compassion for the human condition, but the compassion is a boundless, eternal compassion. But this compassion, it does not mollycoddle and cushion the story of victimization. True compassion, true love reveals where the hiding places are. True compassion understands compassionately the story of victimization, and yet it does not indulge it and indulge the story of poor me or how hard this is. It doesn't indulge that, because to indulge it for 1 nanosecond is to engage in what is not real, right? Reality has no story of separation. Reality has no agenda, no beliefs. Reality has never been in suffering and separation. So we cannot, true compassion is not the mind's idea of a compassion that is saying, poor you, it's hard. True compassion is saying, wake up, see that it's not real, see that you are stuck in a story of victimization. True compassion, true love shakes the unconscious free to bring it into consciousness. True compassion, true love shakes all of those relics of old story and belief, shakes it all so that it can be illumined and come into the light of consciousness, so that it can stop perpetuating the story of me, of separation, and stop that cycle of victimization and looking for love and validation and connection in the external. So the deepest tangle is in relationship, usually with family and partners, long-term kind of relationships. So we have to just come to an awareness to see how there are these habits that just keep repeating. The only relationship that is valid, we could say, is relationship with self. But when we come into relationship with self, relationship disappears into the remembering of unity. But we want to keep nourishing and nourishing and nourishing what is true. Value the peace, value the emptiness, value the silence, value the stillness, so that we can live this truth and be this radiant shining light and stop carrying around the rocks and burden of beliefs and ideas that create a sense of a separation that does not exist, right? It is separation that does not exist. It is not that we are even healing a wound of separation. We are just coming to remember, flash, spontaneous illumined flash. There is no separation. You are joy. You are beauty. You are love divine. You are wholeness in your essence nature. Now, where there is an unfolding is that you are consciousness. You are consciousness in the process, in the divine process of opening to the fullness of your incredible divinity. You are not a person seeking the divine, right? We have to let go of all these spiritual ideas, right? The ones that we create fridge magnets out of, and come to what is real and true. What is real and true, we can experience in the here now. It brings a resonance and aliveness now. Sometimes even the true wisdom also gets made into fridge magnets. But we want to really pay attention to what resonates and enlivens and brings a sense of, yes, this, right? Where we are resonating at the divine frequency that is pure and refined and subtle. We want to come to recognize when we are resonating in true nature, when we are resonating in recognition, so we can, let's say, recognize recognition. So we can come to recognize this is wholeness, this is truth. We can recognize recognition because there are no thoughts. There's no mind involved. We're not believing something. We're not attached to anything. There's no one else involved. We're in an autonomy, let's say. We're completely autonomous in a deep, unquestionable remembering, where there's an alive frequency that is the illuminated presence of your own being. It's autonomous. It's free of anything external. And it's alive and resonating. Now, we can have the grace of sharing this, but it is not when two or more beings are resonating together, or when I'm in the company of this one, then I am whole. The resonance of wholeness is your own wholeness that is utterly whole and autonomous. You enter into your wholeness and you enter into the field of the self, the infinite field of being. And here there is no one that you are aligning with or attuning with. You are aligned and attuned with your own divine wholeness. You are in the knowing of being through being the being. You are resting in your own being, in your own heart. You are resting in your own divine nature. And your own divine nature is consciousness, consciously aware of itself, knowing itself, recognizing itself consciously. And here is where there is an unfolding of consciousness into finer and finer values. This is the field. This is the flow. This is the flow of grace. This is where we discover life living itself, and where we are free now of personhood. We are free of identification with any thought that creates mind consciousness. We are resting in the consciousness that is consciously aware and awake to itself, in the knowing of itself, illumined in the recognition of its own presence, and utterly free here now. Now there are still discordant patterns, like residues, and this is what gets refined. Once we have seen through separation, we never go into separation again. We never go into separation. We are meeting residues. We are meeting residual, discordant patterns and refining. But once we know unquestionably who we are and the illusion has popped, we never ever go into separation again. And this is really important to recognize, because there can be residual patterns where the mind consciousness says, oh, I'm back in separation. Oh, now I'm in this, now I'm in that. Not true, right? There can be a going backwards and forwards before we really see through the illusion of separation. But once we've seen through the illusion, it's like once we've opened the box and we've seen what's inside, we can never forget what we've seen inside, right? Can never forget yourself once you know yourself. And yet, yes, there is still a refinement and a refinement that brings us to the deepest remembering, where the discordant patterns of consciousness have refined into the remembering of unity. This refinement, it's a process. It's not so much a process in time, but it can feel on the surface of life like that. But it is the consciousness truly opening to the finer and finer frequencies, remembering itself, remembering its own divinity, remembering what is the source of consciousness. Where does consciousness come from? What is consciousness, right? And it's consciousness consciously refining out of the denser layers and denser frequencies, alchemizing, transmuting, and coming to experience itself in finer and finer frequencies. And so as these words come, you start to recognize the finer frequencies. You start to recognize the sense of knowing the being the being, and knowing yourself. And that there in this knowing is an aliveness. And this aliveness is the intelligence, the intelligence that's like a true wisdom. It's a wisdom light. It's the illumined principle, and it's flowing within itself. So once we become aware in consciousness, in our own consciousness, of this flowing aliveness, we want to rest illumined, rest in this flow, rest in the aliveness, so that the aliveness is what we are favoring and valuing, the flow, so that we're enlivening the flow. We're enlivening the flow by bringing attention and recognition of the flow. We're resting in the joyful flow, the enlivened flow, the enlivened, illuminated flow of life living itself. And as we nourish this and favor this, we are enlivening it and deepening consciousness's recognition of itself, life living itself. And here then, in our lived experience, it feels like life meeting itself in and as everything, meeting itself and merging into itself. We could say that we start to recognize, as we recognize the consciousness that we are, and this flow and this enlivened flow, we start to recognize that this is all there is. this consciousness flowing within itself, and the light of awareness illuminating everything. And as consciousness is flowing as life, and life is living itself, and it's consciously creating all of these situations that play as life on the surface, the divine play, life is meeting itself. And as life meets itself, we could say consciousness is meeting itself, and it's recognizing itself in its essence nature as consciousness, right? So it stops being a me experiencing a situation like the victim cycle. Something's happening to me. It's life experiencing life, life meeting life, consciousness meeting itself and opening to receive itself, receiving itself. And as it receives itself, it merges the discordant patterns that can play as resistance and challenge, conditioning, denial, stress. It meets all of this in utter openness and transmutes the discordant into wholeness, into love, into bliss. And this transmutation, life living itself, receiving itself, meeting itself, recognizing itself in its essence nature, it distills and alchemizes, let's say, the rocks to stones, to pebbles, to little teeny little pebbles, to sand, to dust, right? Finer and finer frequencies, right? This is the lived experience, is this process of alchemizing and transmuting. So we want to value the peace, the truth, the being, so that we can transmute everything into love. We want to bring everything that feels unlovable and unworthy, everything that is conditioned and protected, we want to bring it all to love. We want to bring it all to its true nature. Everything is attempting to awaken to itself. Consciousness is attempting to awaken to itself in finer and finer frequencies. Consciousness is meeting itself. It meets itself. It knows its essence nature, so it openly receives itself. It feels its essence nature. It recognizes itself. And then anything discordant in the field starts to melt into love, starts to soften into a tenderness, starts to soften because the essence nature of the patterns are meeting in an intelligent knowing of the essence nature. And so anything that is discordant, that feels like stress, it melts where essence nature is recognizing itself. So this is what we speak of when we speak about feeling the feelings. This is what is happening. We are resting in the being, feeling the feelings, and the feelings are discordant patterns of consciousness. So when we rest in the being, we're resting and valuing and favoring the peace, the stillness, the being knowing itself, the presence, the flow of life. We're recognizing this, and we're letting this presence, this love, touch everything by just holding an open, awake presence. The feelings then that are being felt are the discordant patterns, and the discordant patterns naturally melt into their own true nature, right? Everything is melting into the oneness. Everything is melting into love. It is only divine love that can truly transmute and bring the discordant to wholeness. So we have to be resting in a depth of being We cannot do this work on the surface of life. We cannot do this work processing through the mind. However much we sit with our stuff, if we are sitting in mind, we cannot collapse the pattern completely. Let's say the pattern cannot collapse completely because it needs a mirror of its true nature to collapse into. It needs the mirror of love, of wholeness, of this incredible illumination to collapse into, to guide it into the complete collapse. So this is what is happening. This is what is unfolding. There's no doing involved. There's nothing to understand. The words as they come are not instruction. The words as they come are just speaking of what is happening here now. It is the process of consciousness speaking to itself. The laws of nature, the devata, are speaking to themselves, illuminating what needs to be illuminated. So we could say that the transmutation is happening right now. That's the magic. It's constant. It's constant. It doesn't sleep. It's constantly alive and transmuting and illuminating and bringing itself into itself. Because there's a momentum happening, and the momentum is the natural flow of life. So it has nothing to do with what the me is thinking. There is a deeper process that is constantly unfolding. And we start to recognize this deeper process that is unfolding. We start to recognize it in the finer and finer frequencies of our own natural being. We start to feel clearer, deeper, more enlivened, more joyful. We start to recognize the true essence nature. And as we recognize the finer frequencies of our essence nature, we want to really value and nurture and favor what is true, the emptiness, the openness, the clarity, the simplicity of being. We only come to the finer and finer values of our own consciousness through being consciously aware of the natural being that we are. Coming to open to the finer and finer revealings of the process of how this consciousness unfolds to more of itself, how it meets itself, how it creates the appearance of the world and situations in order to experience itself. So our collaboration wants to be inward, the collaboration with silence, the collaboration with emptiness, the collaboration with silent being, with stillness, with truth, where we feel the resonance to deepen the attunement in our own lived experience, in the felt sense, to know what brings you into the remembering of yourself, and to rest here, to recognize that this being, it goes nowhere, it does not change. Whatever's happening on the surface of life, the being is always being itself, and you are that being. And the being that you are is light and whole and pure and innocent and utterly free. So right now, as you are feeling the attuned resonance, do not be looking for something. Just feel the felt sense of being. The felt sense of being, knowing itself, is completely independent of mind consciousness and story and the surface of life. The felt sense of being is completely independent and is not disturbed or affected in any way by what is happening on the surface of life. Perhaps by now we are deep enough into the field of consciousness and you are feeling the felt sense of being, and there is a remembering. Once we are spontaneously in, we have fallen in, then we almost cannot know, how did we fall in here? What happened? What happened is the resonance of remembering, the innermost being just dropped into the recognition, and hear the peace that is undisturbable. Hear the silence, hear the stillness, and to recognize this stillness, this openness, and that this peaceful being is not disturbed in any way by anything that is moving and changing. That this deep, silent being is ever present, silent, and aware and awake to itself. It knows itself, and the knowing of itself is inside its own direct experience of itself. This is the being that you are. So it is to remember this essence nature, this self, this true natural self that is not anything to do with mind or me or thoughts or mine. It's just completely independent and free. And that the felt sense of being, this being, is everywhere. It's open and wide and free. There are no edges. That you're not inside the body or inside the mind. You are watching from outside, from a spaciousness. You're watching and aware. You can see the mind and the thoughts. You can see the body. You can feel it all and see it all. But where you are is the vast, open, spacious presence that is everywhere, at no location, and is not bound or limited in any way. That you are utterly free. And when you can feel this freedom of who you are, there is this spacious recognition. Oh yes, this freedom, that you are the freedom, that you are the stillness, you are the silence and the openness, that you are ever free, and you are here now, timeless, eternal. And this eternal being that you are is deathless, because this being has never been born, right? This being is eternal. It is eternal life. It is before everything, even the idea of birth, right? It is got nothing to do with the person. It is the eternal, timeless being. And you can feel now how you are the timeless being. You do not need to, nor can you, understand it with the mind, but you can feel a truth, and the truth is immediate. The truth is here now. It's the aliveness of the being knowing itself. Right now in this moment, the knowing, the truth, it's here and it's fresh and it's clear, and it cannot be taken anywhere, it cannot be conceptualized. It's just this freshness of being. And as the being recognizes itself simply being, it is illuminated in the remembering of itself. And this is the light that you are. Before you started carrying around the rocks and the stones and the stories, that this is the light that you are, that you have always been. Before anything happened in my life, you were the eternal being. And underneath the play of life, you have always been the eternal being. You have always been peace and stillness and simplicity. And here now, you are that simple, immaculate being that you have always, always been. And the knowing of this is in the innermost being that you are, that it's not a knowing with the mind, that mind consciousness, in a way, is the rocks. Mind consciousness is the dense frequency. And when you can feel this lighter frequency of being, that mind consciousness just spontaneously lets go and merges into its true nature, because the mind consciousness, it's longing for itself. Everything is just longing for itself. Everything is longing to know itself. So when you feel the sense of your knowing, this stillness, this silent, peaceful being, there's a sense of fulfillment in the moment, a sense of, yes, this is true. This is what I am. Just freedom, just simplicity, just openness. And you are the openness. And hear the emptiness that we speak of. So you have not had to empty out the rocks and the stories one by one. Just in the instantaneous moment of remembering the being, there are no rocks, no stories. You just are yourself. If mind consciousness stirs up and says, oh, but what about? The mind can find stories. The mind can find things, a past, a future. The mind can find these, but without the mind, who are you? When you stop telling your story, who are you? Without a story, who are you? Who are you in truth, in essence, without your story? You are free. You are clear. You are immaculate being. You are the eternal presence of now. You are this moment empty and blissful in the emptiness and equanimity, in the harmony and flow of being life, without a story, without a fixed position, without protection or defense, without condition. You are life flowing unconditionally, and life flowing unconditionally is love. It is divine love. And everything that is flowing to return to the remembering of divine love, of divine wholeness, to the light. Everything is returning to the light. Consciousness is unfolding to remember its own fullness, its divinity, its utter purity. So you see, consciousness cannot find its purity in the distortion and corruption on the surface of life, in the external, in the world, right? Cannot find your holiness in the corruption. You cannot find your purity. But it takes a certain courage to face your own purity, to really meet your own holiness, right? Where there are ideas that are held that I am separate from God, that I am abandoned by God, that I am rejected by God, that I am left out, right? Where there are any of these stories, I am unlovable, I am unworthy, I am not holy, I am impure, I am tainted, I am broken, I am wounded, I am not whole. All of these stories of the human condition can act as a barrier to knowing your absolute oneness with divinity, your absolute oneness. You are not someone looking for that divinity. You are consciousness that already knows its divinity and is unfolding to its fullness, right? So where you feel like a unique being, you are a unique flow of intelligence. Each one is a unique flow, but the unique flow of the laws of nature are an intelligence that is one with all intelligence, right? We are moving as one divine murmuration of consciousness unfolding to itself. So whatever unfolds at any point supports the whole. It reverberates out because it's one. So every being that has a breakthrough offers that to the whole. Every being that comes to know the true essence nature and sees through separation, that reverberation affects the whole. The greatest gift of service that we can offer in this human life is to value what is true and to nourish, favor the peace, the stillness, the silence of being, reality, so that we can shift the flow of consciousness in the most incredible ways. As consciousness opens to more of itself, it affects the whole, always, without any impediment. So our service is not as a human that is trying to achieve something, but we are consciousness unfolding to finer and finer frequencies, recognizing the true essence nature and opening and opening and opening to the fullness of divinity, divine wholeness. It is natural, it's what we already are, and it is therefore a natural unfolding to know this and to live this. It is already happening. It is a momentum, a flow within itself, and that flow, it dances as life. So it is just to come to see from the true perspective what all of this is about. What is this that is happening here? Because it's not really happening out there. It's happening in here, in consciousness, in this incredible landscape of consciousness where we are one and we are flowing together, loving, supporting, dancing together as one. So as we shift to a true perspective, we start to dance together in more intimate ways, let's say, because we know there is a oneness and we are only ever wanting to uplift the one. We are the one uplifting the one. So the motivation is only ever for the one, right? So we could say this speaking, it's the one speaking to the one for the one. It's uplifting consciousness for the sake of consciousness. So we are never in this process for the me to get some kind of selfish gain. We are always, always in a flow of absolute surrender and, in a way, devotion to this process, that consciousness is collapsing into itself in order to know itself and open to the finer and finer values of its wholeness, its divinity. This is the natural unfolding that is happening. So as these words come, they come to refine, they come to enliven, they come to reveal and illuminate what is already here, so that the consciousness that is here can recognize itself more clearly and start to resonate at finer and finer frequencies of recognition. So we are resonating together. And as we go deeper and deeper in, the resonance starts to get finer and finer and finer. And every being that starts to resonate at finer frequencies, it uplifts the whole resonance frequency, and the light of truth is shining brighter, and the light of truth is shining brighter. And we are laying down those rocks and pebbles and the density of mind consciousness and the discordant patterns in consciousness. We are merging it all just through being here, just through being and favoring and valuing what is true, collaborating with our own essence nature. We are uplifting the whole. We are creating, let's say, reverberations of finer and finer frequencies that are affecting, shifting the whole of consciousness and supporting consciousness's natural movement and flow to evolve within itself, to know the fullness of its divine nature, and to live this right on the surface of life. So this is not a personal mission. This is not a personal unfolding. It's all a divine orchestration, naturally flowing and dancing and loving, right? We use these different words because it helps us in our lived experience. It helps us connect into certain frequencies, right? When we connect into certain frequencies, it allows us to illuminate where there are hiding places and denials and conditions, protections. It helps us to connect in and illuminate what is ready to collapse, what is ready to come forward, transmute into the wholeness of light, right? So this all happens in a graced sense of simply being. When we are resting in the being, we are open, we are merciful, we are graceful, we are patient, compassionate, and kind. There is love here. There is holiness here, right? This is the true essence nature. And of course, there is joy and happiness here. There is simplicity and peace here. And there is awe and wonder here. But there is no understanding of any of this. It is all a naturalness, this incredible naturalness. And in our innermost sense of what is, we can recognize what is ready to see itself, to see clearly your own reflection, to see your reflection in your innermost knowing of yourself, to see yourself, to see the light that you are shining here now, aware presence, illuminated, alive, awake as love. Hmm. Hmm. Mm. Mm. So it is to favor the peace, the silence, the light that you are. Lay down the burden. Stop telling the story and be yourself. Favor telling the truth in every moment, the truth of who you are, your essence, nature. Be the shining light in every moment. Do not leave yourself. Any disturbance on the surface of life is just a sign that you have left yourself. It's the only thing that is ever happening is that you leave yourself. The only thing that ever happens is that you can abandon yourself. Feel the profundity of this. The only thing that ever happens is that you leave yourself.